Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Cassidy Diamond. I am the Public Programs and Events Manager here at the International Documentary Association. I'm so glad you could all join us this evening for this amazing conversation. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping rules. I'd like to start with some land acknowledgements. I'm coming to you today from Los Angeles, which is the home, which is on the occupied land of the Tongva and the Chumash people who have been stewards of this land for generations. We would like to acknowledge the indigenous people on whose land we stand on today. And now, just before we get to the conversation, some little housekeeping. You can submit questions for our panelists through the Q&A function. We will have Billy Porter on with us for about 20 minutes. So if you have any questions for him, make sure those are submitted before that 20-minute mark. You can also converse in the chat room function with us. And before we get started, I'm going to play a brief trailer of the film, and then I'll introduce the panel.
The Tony Award for Best Play goes to Terrence McNally's Masterclass.
Terrence is able to get to the core of the human condition in so many different ways. I defy you to name another playwright who can do that.
Edward Albee said the first time he laid eyes on Terrence McNally, he saw the most beautiful face he'd ever seen in his life.
He said, would you like to come up for a nightcap, which was not very coded for you know what.
Those times were really, really, really difficult and frightening for gay men and women.
He started so early to show Americans who gay people are. Terrence did it before anyone else. He did it better than anyone else.
Terrence was way ahead of his time.
John Steinbeck said, let me give you one bit of advice. Don't write for the theater. It'll break your heart.
Our defense is just doing the very best we can, and screw it otherwise.
I'd have no career if it wasn't for Terrence McNally. When it comes to Terrence McNally tributes, I'm pretty much on speed dial for the tri-state area.
He read one line. We go, where have you been? Yes, you have the part. Thank you very much. Winning awards does not change the struggle to be an authentic person.
I said to him, why are you destroying yourself? You're a brilliant writer. Stop drinking.
Not many people will fess up to love at first sight, but I will, and I believe in it.
I love you.
An artist responds to their world and tries to make sense of it.
The arts are an attempt to hold in our hands those moments that are full and right and true and just life. I want more of these moments.
I'm going to introduce the executive director of the IDA, Simon Kilmurry. He's going to be our moderator for the evening. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Cassidy. Thank you so much. And I'm really excited to welcome two very special guests this evening. Jeff Kaufman. Jeff is the director, producer, and writer of Terrence McNally, Every Act of Life. Hey, Jeff, welcome.
Hey, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you. And I'm thrilled to introduce the one and only Billy Porter. Billy, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, we had hoped to have the wonderful RITA MORENO join us tonight. Unfortunately, she had to step aside, but she did send a message which I want to share with everyone who's listening. And RITA says that she wants you all to know that she loves and misses Terrence. She loves the film Every Act of Life, and she wishes everyone all the best. So greetings from RITA. Jeff, let me start with you, if I might. Terrence is such a huge life, such an enormous body of work. How do you as a filmmaker go about beginning to sort through that, beginning to organize that into a coherent 90-minute film? Small question.
Yeah, and I'm glad you used the word coherent. Thank you for that endorsement. It's a challenge. I mean, I think part of it is your conception at the beginning of the film, the points that really resonate with you about Terrence, that sort of drive you to certain pieces, and then things emerge over time. I mean, talking to Billy, talking to anyone in the film, deepens your connection and gives you new things to spark off of. I will say with Terrence, I love the fact that he was a pioneer both in his life and in his work. I loved right away the sort of quiet courage he had to keep pushing himself forward creatively and in other ways. And I was really drawn to the fact that Terrence, at every stage of his life, was just so curious about everything. And I remember talking to him the first time about just how impressed I was as an artist that he kept just driving himself forward. So, you think about those sort of tentpoles at the beginning, but then it opens up to you. And I always make a script, and we use that as the foundation of things, but and it's also, as you know, a collaborative medium. So working with everybody feeds it all together.
Correct. I'll come back to a little bit more of that later on, because I know we have a limited time with Billy this evening, and I want to ask Billy some questions. Billy, there's a moment in the film where you say, "We stand on his shoulders," and I'm really curious for you to talk a little bit more about that, and also your first encounter with Terrence's work and the impression that it made on you when you first, when this art first entered your life.
Well, I have to say that, Terrence is like you said, it was quiet courage. As a Black queer man growing up in the 80s during the AIDS crisis, there was very little for me to latch on to that I felt a part of. And in many ways, while I wasn't a part of Terrence's world racially, I was very much a part of that world as a queer person. And so I had to piece together my representations, the representations that allowed for me to move forward. And one of the things that I loved so much about Terrence, which you also said, he was prolific and curious for his entire life. And when I say curious, it's like he would meet a person like me, and the first time I met him, he just wanted to know everything about me. He had seen me perform, and he wanted to know who I was and how I could sing like that, and be so present, and and the conversations. I never got the opportunity to be in anything that he wrote, but like the conversations that I had with him, and the courage to speak my truth as a Black gay man. I don't know that I would have become a writer. He's one of the people, just in terms of following his career and sort of being in his presence, it gave me the permission to speak like that. He was one of the first people to speak like that. He and Harvey Fierstein, and they were starting this sort of mainstream theatrical queer conversation. that's what I mean by we stand on his shoulders. It's like they kicked the door down. He kicked the door down so that I could walk through it. And like I said, in this time of civil unrest, I need to bring up that it transcended my relationship with Terrence's work, and Terrence in person transcended race. I have to say that right now, in particular, in the world that we're in. You never know who you might touch. You never know. You know, it's like we as artists have to be open, because we transcend all of the other bullshit and mishigas that the outside world puts on us. We can transcend that. Terrence did just that.
I'm so glad you bring up, Billy, that link to the moment that we're in right now, and it's something that Jeff and I were talking about last week, because there's that moment in the film where Terrence is at a rally. I think it's an AIDS rally in New York in the late 80s, early 90s. And he thanks the artists who spoke up. And he rails against the artists who didn't have the courage to speak up. And it just felt so of this moment.
Yeah.
And you have a platform and are vocal. And I just, you know, it just felt so, it took me right back to that time, but also felt rooted in the now.
Yeah, I learned that from him. I learned how to stand up. I got the courage from watching people like Terrence do it. You know, it's like, that's where I learned how powerful my voice individually could be.
And, you know, I think that speaks to something else too, because when Terrence condemns those who didn't speak up, that's saying we all have a responsibility for each other. We have a responsibility in a time of crisis to speak up. And Billy's been doing that magnificently. But it's a call out to all of us.
Yeah.
What more important time than now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He was, as Billy, as you mentioned, and Jeff, as you've referenced also, he was prolific. He was deeply connected throughout his whole life, and even after he got sick, even more prolific. What was it that do you feel that drove him to stay so engaged, to feel so committed that he couldn't, almost a compulsive engagement to keep producing the art that he was producing?
Well, I personally feel called by a higher power greater than myself. And when you go through his work, there is a theme that illuminates that calling. You know, he continues in everything that he writes to push even further, to push the conversation even further, to push it and make the uncomfortable, illuminate the uncomfortable. Because until we can have conversations that make us uncomfortable, we cannot heal, we cannot change. I remember Corpus Christi. You know, I grew up in the Black church. So there's something specific about Corpus Christi to me, obviously, you know, where you go, wow, wow, wow. Like nobody has the guts to say it. It's like when I was 10 years old in Sunday school class, and the teacher was talking about how God is omnipotent and we're made in his image, and he knows, you know, and he knows, he loves us, and he knows what we're going to do before we're going to do it. And I raised my hand and I said, okay, so if God loves us and we're in his image and he loves us and he knows what we're going to do before we're going to do it, why would he create me? Why would he create somebody who he knows is not going to choose him in the way that he wants to be chosen, only to send them to a burning hell for all eternity? That was 10. That was me at 10.
I wish I was in your class going.
That was the beginning. That's curious. That's the curiosity. That was the beginning of my excommunication from the church. But my introduction to myself, you know, being curious and asking questions is what he continued to do, because the journey never stops. The life's journey never stops. We continue to grow. We can continue to grow until the day we die. And that's exactly what he did. And it's so inspiring as an artist.
Let me just add one thing. Billy,
yeah.
When you mentioned Terrence's wonderful play, Corpus Christi, and there's a scene in that where the Jesus figure marries two men. And it always is paralleled to me a wonderful part of his play, Perfect Ganesh, because the Jesus character says to these two men something like, I can't do Terrence's words, so please, Terrence, forgive me. But he says something like, I see the beauty in God in each of you. I celebrate the beauty and divine in each of you. And that's really what the theme of Perfect Ganesh is too, that there is that divine piece in each of us. And I think he sees that in all of his plays, but you know, he sees that in you also.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really, like I said, piecing together representation. He was a big foundation of that for me, you know, that just helped me understand my queerness is the point. My queerness, the thing that everybody is telling me is my liability.
Mm-hmm.
My queerness is my calling. I gotta do that no matter where the chips may fall. I gotta do that. I have to be courageous enough to speak from that place. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. I'd like to pick up on that, because at one point in a panel discussion, Terrence chides the person interviewing him for categorizing him as a gay playwright and not just a playwright, and it seems he didn't. And I think, I can't remember if it's you, Billy, that makes this point in the film. I think it is, that his plays have nothing to do with being gay, but everything to do with not being accepted.
Mm.
That was Cheryl Collar. She said it to Billy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in that tension of both the identity as a gay man that he had. It was a theme throughout a lot of his work, but yet it wasn't the central part of his work. And I think actually Rita also talks about this as I'm blanking on the title of the one, of course. Yes, thank you. Where there was a normality to having a gay character at a point where that was actually very risky on Broadway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wonder if Jeff, you or Billy want to speak to that, you know, kind of notion of identity that Terrence had as a gay man and as a playwright.
Do you want to start?
Go ahead. No, you can go.
It just reminds me in part, first of all, I always hate it when someone also says like, oh, a woman director, as opposed to just a director. We should remove that from all descriptions. It also reminds me of something that Rita was talking about that leads into what Billy's talking about as well, which is that, you know, when Terrence was out as a playwright in the early 1960s, all these legends of the theater who we now know were gay were terrified that if people found out, it would ruin their careers. And I mean, think of the terror that you have when your life is at stake. It's a real fear. But Terrence knew that he had to be true to himself. I think a lot of his journey was, how can I, and this connects to what Billy's saying, how can I be most true to myself? And that's got to be on stage and off stage. And I just think that that's just and we encounter it now. You know, all over the country, there are still people who are just afraid that something horrible could happen to them if their neighbors found out, and they just are denied the chance to be themselves. It's, yeah, the heartbreak goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that truth to oneself is something, Bill, that you help us all follow.
I just, you know, I'm so grateful to be in the generation where I could learn from people who didn't have fear, or if they did have fear, overcame it. Their courage was stronger than their fear. It really, really shaped and formed the human being that I am today. You know, and I can't imagine not speaking. I can't imagine not living in the fullness of my truth. I can't imagine a life without that. I can't imagine it, you know, and it's thanks to the life that Terrence led that I can be here, you know.
Yeah, and that's an enormous legacy, both to you, but I'm sure to many thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who saw his plays and millions who saw his films. Billy, I know you've had a long, busy day and a long, busy month. So we're going to take just one audience question while you're still with us, if that's okay.
Sure.
And then I'll come back to a conversation. We'll wrap up with Jeff. So I'm going to call on my colleague Nikki, who's going to represent the audience here.
Yes, hi. So Wilma Aponte asks, which play of Terrence's would you like to bring back to Broadway and perform in? This is for Billy.
For me, I probably would want to do Lisbon Traviata or Kiss of the Spider Woman, playing the queer character. I can't remember his name. I remember seeing that the first time and going, yeah, that's me. They don't cast Black people in that part, but that's me. They don't cast Black people in that yet, but they will now.
That's a great idea.
It is. It is. Nikki, any more questions before we let Billy go?
I think that's it.
I have one last one, Billy, for you before, if you'll indulge me. And Jeff, you should speak to this too. The end of the movie, you have a lot of your interviewees reading lines from Masterclass, from this piece of Masterclass, which is incredibly moving. And Billy, the scene of you reading that, and you have such raw emotion which jumps through the screen. I wonder, what was it that was happening for you there? What is it that when you're reading these words that touches you so deeply?
The idea of being chosen to be an artist and how sacred, you know, how sacred that is. It's just moving to me. It really is. It's really moving. It's very spiritual, you know, and growing up in a very religious environment, to still be connected to spirit through art is incredibly moving to me.
Well, I want to thank you, Billy, for joining us this evening. We will let you get
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Billy.
you. Y'all have a good night.
Wonderful evening.
Okay, bye-bye.
That was a thrill for me to be able to talk with Billy.
Can I just say, if you haven't, Billy recently recorded that wonderful Stephen Stills song, For What It's Worth. You know, something's happening here, what it is ain't exactly clear. And if you have not seen it, just go to YouTube. Billy just knocks it out of the park. It's also beautiful to watch, but it also, like everything else he was talking about, speaks to our time. So that's my homework assignment after this.
Thank you for that. So Jeff, just I want to go back to kind of the filmmaking craft, and actually I'll start off where I kind of left off with Billy, because I thought that was kind of such a genius ending. You know, I mean, I mean, it seems like a simple idea, but it had such power, and it kind of wrapped up and kind of super condensed Terrence's power of words in this moment where you have all these people reading these lines. Tell us about that idea, how it came about, and it was a moment of, you have these little moments of cinema magic, and that's one of them.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say, and it means a lot. And you know, you don't want people to be conscious of your choices, but you know, you also want them to have an impact. I'm pretty sure that we did a first round of interviews with Christine Baranski and Nathan Lane and Tyne Daly and a few others. And I remember talking to Tyne about that scene, and I think just walking back or traveling afterwards, and I was thinking about those words, and I thought, oh my God, it's so universal. Wouldn't it be intense to have, it's Maria Callas closing masterclass. And the play is so nuanced, and there's a tragedy in it, in that unlike Terrence, Maria Callas's pride actually pushes people away. This wonderful young student, Sharon, who is originally played by Audrey McDonald, rather than lifting her, she pushes her away. But at the end, Maria Callas has a chance to express what it means to be an artist to her. And it's like Terrence is talking. And when she talks about singing, it's really for all of us. It's really beautiful. And I just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have both men and women, you know, universalize it and read it? So when we came back, we just started asking everyone that we interviewed to read that last passage, you know, whether it was Angela Lansbury or, you know, Maren Maisie. We have a wonderful editor, Asher Bingham, and she cut it together. And when we saw that section with Billy, where Billy is literally reading what it means to be an artist, and he just chokes up, I've seen it a gazillion times, and I can't, I always feel moved. But let me tell you one little thing that I think is amazing. So we had done almost everybody in the sequence, and we didn't have Terrence yet. And I explained to Terrence why we wanted to shoot him. We went back to his house to do it. And so we probably had 15, 18 people read those lines. And of course, at the end of it, it's the last part of the play, and then boom, that's it. And I think that her last line is, so that's that, or something like that. But when Terrence read it, he read Maria Callas's last line, and then he read the stage directions.
Yes.
So he was the only person who said, she packs up her things and goes, and he pauses, the end. And it was like, oh, that's the end of the movie. I mean, you know, thank you, Terrence. And it wasn't prompted. It was just, you know, it was just life bringing you there. But Terrence talks about that. Terrence talks about how if you are really immersed in the characters, if you really know who they are, they will take you where you need to go.
Yeah, I'm glad you noted that thing about Terrence, because it struck me when he read Black, you know, the end. There's a beautiful, beautiful ending, and then to hear it was a moment of serendipity. It's kind of quite wonderful. You alluded to the editing, which I'm sure was incredibly challenging. You have a larger than life, prolific central character who you're focusing on, and you have all of these voices commenting. Talk about your editing process, how long that took, what kind of challenges did you encounter in that?
Sure. Well, first of all, one of the things we wanted to do, because Terrence has written so many plays, and we couldn't obviously do all of them, but we also didn't want to do each one the same. And so we wanted to find a way to have the story of each play, or the connection to each play, have its own special quality. So like in Perfect Ganesh, thanks to Tyne Daly, there was this beautiful reading that sort of flowed from Terrence holding a Ganesha mask, you know, to her reading. We wanted each one to have its own identity, so we weren't just repeating ourselves. But basically, the way I do documentaries is we film everything. We have all the footage, we have everything transcribed, we have all the archival stuff, and get transcriptions of everything. So that's like 1,000 pages or more. And I put that all in this sort of big Bible for myself that's organized in all these different categories, you know, youth, mother, play, whatever it is. And then from that, I just try to structure a script that makes sense and that works, and that hits those ideas. I've come to think of it as more like an architectural's first drawing. It's not like all the furniture in the house and the curtains and stuff like that, but it gives you a structure that you're going to. Again, we have, you know, my producing partner, Marcia Ross, has input all the way through, and I can't tell you how formative that is in every single stage, and then when we're actually cutting. We worked on 5 films with Asher Bingham, who's an incredibly talented editor. And she never hesitates to say, that's a terrible idea, or hey, let's try this. And it's a great relationship to have with someone. And then, you know, the composers, all the different pieces. And then bouncing it off of Terrence and his husband, Tom, you know, you need to make sure that how it's resonating. One of the things that Marcia said at the beginning was, we need to make this film work both for people who know nothing about the theater and people who know everything about the theater. And so that's a tricky spot in between.
And I imagine you're working with a lot of high profile people. I imagine that's, you know, as a production wise, logistically, that's a challenge. But also, you know, in terms of how you properly frame them and shoot them, and you know, it felt, you made a lot of very conscious choices, like the scene in the cafe, the Edie Falco scene in the cafe, which had a lovely kind of casualness to it, but each person seemed to have kind of their own frame. And I want to ask you a little bit about your decision making around how you've shot people.
Oh, good. I mean, I would love to talk endlessly about Terrence, but just in brief, you know, you don't want to ever be self-conscious. You don't want to say, hey, look what I'm doing. But we want the film to look beautiful and to be immersive. That's a word I love, immersive. You know, are you pulled in to stories? And so part of what we try to do in our films is not have anyone tell you how you should feel, but just tell a series of stories that bring you into that world, and then you'll get there anyway. So it's just attention to detail. I think that's the key, is always don't let down your guard. If you let down your guard for a second, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. The wonderful story of Mrs. McElroy.
Yeah.
Which it was just so emotionally moving, and I'm so glad that's in there. But I'm wondering if there was any moments that you wanted to get in there, but we all had to make hard choices in making these films. Sometimes you have to kill your darlings.
Yeah.
Is there a darling that you wish you could have fit in there, but just it was going to take us off on too much of a tangent?
Well, first of all, if I could take 15 seconds for people who didn't see the film, Mrs. McElroy was this high school English teacher who saw in Terrence that thing he didn't fully even see inside himself, and encouraged him to be a writer, encouraged him to, you know, to fall in love with Shakespeare and to have the very highest standard. And she wrote him this amazing letter that Marcia and I found down in his archive in Austin, which she says, you know, good. She's basically saying good luck. She just gave him a grade on a paper, which is A+, by the way, something I never got. but then she also talks to him about the challenges in his work. And it's like everything in his work at age 17 is kind of something that he had to deal with the rest of his life. It's an amazing piece. And we were lucky that Meryl Streep got to voice Mrs. McElroy, which was a real treat. So anyway, that's the backstory on that. There's just, I think maybe the thing I feel worst about is that Terrence also wrote some wonderful operas. And part of the story of Terrence is also his pursuit of love and connection with another person. And sometimes it was turbulent, like with Edward Albee. And we talk about it, several different people he was with, and it leads to him being with his husband, Tom Curtihy, who's a wonderful guy. And we wanted the arc of the film through the plays to also connect to that journey for Terrence and to connect with Tom. And at a certain point, I just wanted it to be Tom and Terrence and to stopping other people be in the film, and so that we're sharing it with them. And anyway, at that point, we just couldn't do another whole production. And he did this fabulous opera called Dead Man Walking, which is great, but we just couldn't get it in. And my apologies to the composer and to everyone else, because it's worth it.
Maybe a follow-up.
Yes.
Maybe a follow-up. Unfortunately, Terrence died this past March, tragically of COVID in this terrible time that we're all living through. But you got to travel with him when the film was out in theaters. And the film ended up on American Masters, the premier arts and culture series on American television, and kudos to Michael Cantor and his team for that series. What did it mean for Terrence to be out traveling and then for the film to end up on a place like American Masters?
It's so funny you asked that, because I remember, it may have been the day that we were shooting the last read, but I think it was a different time. But I remember sitting in Terrence's apartment, Tom and Terrence's apartment, while we were setting up and just chatting. And he was asking, well, what do you think is going to happen with this film? And you never want to promise anything to anyone, because you do everything you can and you have to put it out there and hope for the best. But Terrence said, what I would like the most is if it could be on American Masters. That would be the most fun for me. That would mean the most to me. And I said, well, Terrence, American Masters is an amazing series and I love it. And yeah, that'd be perfect, but I just don't get your hopes up, because life is cruel. But sometimes life is not cruel. And it was a wonderful journey that led us to Michael Cantor and his team at American Masters. And I must say that, we heard from Terrence so many times where he'd say, I just got to know from someone I knew 30 years ago. I just got to know from someone I grew up with, or a friend in, all over the country. And seeing it on American Masters for him was a delight. And then hearing his reports of who saw it and told him about it was so nice. Yeah, to share that with him was very special.
It's a wonderful gift that you were able to give him.
He gave us more of a gift than we would ever give him. I will say that everyone's complicated. They're real people, but Terrence taught me so much about cooperation in work, and what it means to be true to yourself, and what it means to love someone. You see that in his relationships with Tom and others. There's just so much to learn from him. And Billy was talking about that. It lives on, and not all of us can say that.
And just to follow up, the presenting it with when you're out on the road with him in front of live audiences, what was that experience like? That must have been, well, tell us, how was it?
There was many times where it was special, but I think the most intense moment was a two-parter. It was at the Castro Theater, and there was full, it was jammed, there was thousands of people there, which is what you always want for your films. But Terrence came up on stage. we were there as well, but Terrence was in the center of the stage, and people just applauded for like 5 minutes. And you know, what could be better than that? And then afterwards, we went out and had a nice talk, dinner together, the four of us. And that was, you know, that was a night you don't forget. But I just think I can see Terrence on stage at the Castro, feeling, you know, thousands of people's love and admiration, and that's very gratifying.
Well, I think I'm looking at the chat here, and there's a wonderful comment from Wilma Aponte, who talks about meeting him casually in the lobby of the Public Theatre in New York after a performance of The Normal Heart. And he was surprised that he was recognized, and they had some small talk, and his work will always be remembered and he is missed. And I think that probably sums up, he had such an impact for his work, his life had such an impact on so many people at such a pivotal time, you know, through the latter half of the 20th century into this century, and that it still resonates deeply with us today. So,
Simon, can I just say, if we have a second left, Terrence believed in the core of his being that the arts could push society forward and had a responsibility to do that. And we're in a time of great distress. I won't dictate how many different ways, but Terrence believed that the arts could help us find a better version of ourselves. That's what Billy was talking about too, and that it could push us to a better place. And I think if there's a lesson to take from this, besides, oh, go see a lot of Terrence's plays, is that sense of responsibility and that sense of trying to make what we're sharing here together better. That's what Terrence believed in.
I think that is a wonderful note on which for us to wrap up. Art has the power to change lives. It's changed my life. I know it's changed yours. From reading this chat, it's changed a lot of people who are tuned into this. And you have given us a gift, because you've given people a way into his work who don't know his work, and you've given people a way to remember his work with those of us who do know his work a little bit better. So congratulations, Jeff, on such a wonderful film, and I wish you all good luck with it as you move forward.
Thank you, Simon, for doing this today, and to everyone who's helped make this possible. And thanks to everyone who's been with us tonight. It means a lot.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yes, thank you both very much. We have 2 more of these documentary conversations happening. We have one more tomorrow and one more next week. So go to documentary.org to check them out. But thank you, Jeff, so much. This was wonderful. Thank you, Simon, as always. And everyone have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.